Eddie laid low through the elementary years, and many folks had forgotten how rotten he'd been. Eddie, however, decided he'd been caught because he'd been so obvious. He spent several years watching how people responded to words. Johnny Jones taught him a valuable lesson. Word choices and delivery of a message could have a huge impact without any physical contact. It could be so quiet and so subtle, yet have a mental punch so extreme that he would be in control. And one other thought came to his mind. What if he taught others to provide the muscle to enforce his commands? Even Johnny Jones could not watch more than one person at a time, so Eddie started to develop his very own minions who would carry out his dastardly deeds. They were initially physically weak, but he taught them to exercise and build their muscles. While he stripped them down mentally to build them up, he removed any hint of goodness in their hearts and made them cold. In their obedience to his evil desires, they became bold and dangerous. Eddie became more feared than ever. Things seemed to be going well in the bully empire that Eddie had built. Money was taken from many people at lunch, and Eddie generally got what he wanted. In a sick and twisted way, many of the girls in school were attracted to his persona. During his junior and high school years, he was the king of the castle. One day during his senior year in high school, something changed. A new boy came to town from Tennessee. He stood about 6'7" tall at the age of 15, and he weighed 255 pounds, most of which was hard muscle, earned through years of hard labor on the family farm. He lifted weights for a hobby, and although people spotted for him, he rarely needed support. While most of the kids in school wanted to make fun of his southern accent, he quickly won them over with his big smile and engaging personality. His name was Tom Lemming, but he introduced himself as Big Tom. Gym class came after lunch, which never made much sense to anyone. People were belching and emitting other forms of gas in an attempt to digest food while getting physically fit, as was required by the state of New York. Big Tom towered over the other boys as they lined up on the basketball sideline as they waited for the coach Lou to address them. The coach was always about 5 minutes late because he was in the hallway talking to Nurse Mallory. It was obvious he liked her as he leaned against the wall and twirled his whistle around his finger one way and then twirled it back the other way and over again. She liked it too because she giggled at everything he said. It was frustrating to Coach Lou that his job was interrupting his time with the nurse, but he excused himself from her and ran to the boys. He barked out the names of the boys to see who was in attendance. He pointed out the dress code violations to the same freaks who smelled like pot every time they came to class. Then he spoke. Girls, the game today is wrestling. I'm going to teach you the basics, and then we're going to pair up in groups of 2. Don't worry, I'll do the picking so you won't have it too easy. Keep your hands where they need to be and no funny stuff. After a half hour of exhaustive sampling of takedowns and ways to pin an opponent, Coach Lou paired everyone off. The big surprise of the day was when Big Tom was matched up with Eddie. Someone whispered loud enough for Big Tom to hear. Don't pin him. Let him win. Big Tom seemed indifferent to the warning. Coach Lou sent everyone to different parts of the mat to warm up. He said after 10 minutes he would call everyone to the big circle so they could watch others wrestle. Big Tom and Eddie spent the time stretching muscles and staring at each other. Eddie spoke first. I hear you're from Tennessee. Big Tom smiled and said, That's right. How are you? I'm Big Tom. Eddie hissed. I don't care who you are. When we go to that mat, you better just put on a good show and let me roll you down nice and easy. 1, 2, 3, and it'll be all over. Otherwise, I have people that will make you real sorry you didn't listen to my good advice. Do you understand what I'm saying? Big Tom still smiled. I do. You're telling me that you're the boss, and apparently you got friends in high places that might hurt me if I don't listen. Is that what you're saying? Eddie smiled back. You learn quickly, farm boy. Just make it look like a good, fair fight, okay? Big Tom looked serious and said, Okay, you're the boss. Coach Lou called Big Tom and Eddie to the big circle. Big Tom was about a foot taller than Eddie, but Eddie was full of confidence since a deal was in place. The coach put his hand over his face to hide a secret smile. He blew the whistle. Big Tom let Eddie move in and pull him down to the mat. Once down, Big Tom used one of his legs to flip Eddie over on his back. Instead of jumping at Eddie and forcing a count, Big Tom got up and moved around the circle. This pleased Eddie. It was the kind of show he wanted. It felt like an actual match, but even better, it looked like one. Eddie moved in again for another takedown, but this time Big Tom moved out of the way and Eddie grabbed at the air as he tumbled to the mat. One of the boys in the crowd giggled. Eddie looked to see who it was. A mental note was placed in the revenge file. He was livid. Big Tom smiled. As Eddie raced towards him, Big Tom quickly put Eddie in a half Nelson and placed his huge foot in the backside of Eddie's knee. Eddie went down as if he were falling, and by brute force, Big Tom flipped a struggling Eddie to his back. Once the full weight of Big Tom came down on Eddie's chest, it was evident that the game was over. Coach Lou was happy to slap the mat 3 times and call the match. Eddie's face was red. He stared at Big Tom. Big Tom smiled. Coach Lou raised Tom's arm in victory. Big Tom wrestled with Tommy Smith later that gym class. Tommy Smith was still very overweight, so Big Tom used the weight against Tommy and was throwing him around, using momentum and physics to win. Tommy was hurting so bad he cried. Big Tom surprisingly whispered in Tommy's ear as the ref smacked the mat 3 times. "You're nothing but a loser." Eddie didn't like someone taking over the role of bully. Eddie's whole life had been a whole series of taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. This was not uncommon, but he didn't like the humiliation of the public display of failure. It did not bode well for his reputation. Something had to be done to Big Tom and Johnny. Big Tom enjoyed the victory for a very short time. On his way home from school, he was attacked from behind. The person very carefully hit him in the back of the skull with a sharp rock. The body was then placed in a wheelbarrow so it wasn't dragged at all. The wheelbarrow was rolled over smooth rocks on the edge of the river. There were no tracks left behind. Big Tom was brought to the rocky edges of Halfway Brook. His body was thrown into the water. Forensics in Washington County involved a great deal of speculation rather than medical know-how. It was determined by the coroner that Big Tom had gotten dizzy, distracted, or careless, and fell down on the way home. He must have tripped on the rocks, fell, and then hit his head, as there was one obvious bit of trauma to the backside. There was no sign of a struggle. After Big Tom fell in the water, he drowned, a very peaceful death as he was unconscious. A horrified little girl found him floating in the water she rode by on her brand-new birthday bike. A few town folks went to the funeral and tried to bring comfort to this new Ford-Ann family in such a difficult time. Eddie had no desire to go to the funeral, because he had bigger, more important things to do now that Big Tom was no longer a problem. As far as Ford-Ann was concerned, there had never been a murder in the county, only an unfortunate accident to a fine young man.